So, what do we say?
Well, I don't know, but we have to find something like really quickly.
It's easier said than done, it's not really easy.
Well, it's about strong figures, the woman who shaped our destiny, our future.
It's gonna start.
Hey, we're not ready! Let's start from the beginning. According to ancient Greek mythology, human destiny is subject to three goddesses known as the Moirai. Using the wheel of fortune, they weave the thread of life and ensure that all beings live according to the laws of the universe. Clotho is in charge of spinning the web of life. Lachesis measures, stretches, and wraps the thread. She decides which role one will play in the world and the amount of happiness or misfortune that comes with it. Finally, Atropos is responsible for cutting the thread of life, deciding when one should die. Together, they are the embodiment of humanity's ineluctable destiny. So, didn't women shape our destiny? Given this idea, we began to search for women whose actions and fight have contributed in building the world we live in today. Over the centuries, many women have influenced and participated in the constant evolution of our world. Having to choose only some of them was not easy. We have decided to make a focus on certain personalities. For us, they belong to these strong figures, the women who shaped our destiny.
Well, that sounds very poetic.
What do you mean?
The woman who shaped our destiny. You make it sound like it was a piece of cake. Well, it wasn't like that.
In order to be coherent, we have decided to present our strong figures in a chronological order.
Born in 1860, Emilie Hobhouse was a British welfare campaigner, anti-war activist and pacifist. After the death of her mother, she dedicated 14 years of her life to a father in very poor health. It already shows her devotion to humankind. 1898. After the death of her father and the failure of her marriage in Mexico, she returned to England. Little did she know that it was not the last man who would bother her. October 1899, the Second Boer War bursted in South Africa over the British Empire influence in the country. The war opposed the British Empire and two independent Boer states, the South African Republic and the Orange Free State. That year, Emilie Hobhouse was named secretary of the women's branch of the South African Conciliation Committee. Her new status allowed her to go to South Africa. There, she discovered the harsh condition of Boer women and children caused by British military operation. It was a shock.
In the late summer of 1900, I first learned of hundreds of Boer women who had become impoverished and left in rags by our military operations. The poor women who were driven from pillar to post needed protection and organized assistance.
This was the starting point of her fight. In June 1900, she went back to London and organized with other women a protest where they reported the action of the British Empire. A few months later, she created the South African Women and Children Distress Fund, aiming to collect money for Boers' families. Then, she persuaded authorities to let her visit several British concentration camps to provide them with some clothes and medication. In a report entitled Report of a Visit to the Camps of Women and Children in the Cape and Orange River Colonies, she described the living condition in the camps.
In some camps, 2 and even 3 sets of people occupy one tent, and 10 and even 12 persons are frequently herded together in tents of which the cubic capacity is about 500. I call this camp system a wholesale cruelty. She traveled back to England and handed a report to the British government. Her actions were not in vain, because in June 1901, a group of women led by the suffragist Millicent Fawcett were sent to inspect the camps and acknowledge the veracity of Emilie's report. In 1903, thanks to her perseverance, she managed to go back to Orange River Colony to ensure that education was given to women and girls. Grateful for the huge impact Emilie had on their lives, Boer women nicknamed her the Angel of Love. She became an honorary citizen of South Africa for her humanitarian work there. In 1926, she died in London. She was 66 years old.
Her ashes were put in a niche in the National Women's Monuments at Bloemfontein, South Africa, where she is now still considered a heroine.
That's amazing. Yeah, I told you. And what really strikes me is the fact that she really wanted to make sure that everybody could live their life with dignity, and that's just incredible.
That's a good story, isn't it?
Yes, it is. But I also have a good story for you.
Which is?
What do you know about French resistance?
Well, there were men of clandestine movements, which during the Second World War...
Men. Always men. But don't you know that women were also involved in the French resistance?
Sadly, no.
Born in October 1925 in Chartres, Simone Seguin, also known by her codename Nicole Minet, is one of the most feminine figures of the French resistance. She grew up surrounded by men, with her 3 brothers. Her father was a former soldier of World War I, a resistant just like her. At 14, she stopped school and began to work on the family farm. Then, World War II bursted in Europe. Simone Seguin decided to engage in the French resistance. She was 18. She served in the Francs-Tireurs et Partisans in 1944, an armed resistance organization created by the leader of the French Communist Party. She started as a messenger with small little missions. One of her first acts of resistance? Stealing a bicycle from a German female military courier, later used to help carry communications. Then, she went on to take a role in large-scale and dangerous missions, such as seizing German troops, derailing trains, and actions of sabotage. She even participated in train-exploding expeditions. On the 23rd of August 1944, Simone Seguin participated in the liberation of Chartres, where she helped capturing 24 German prisoners. She was also present during the liberation of Paris 2 days after. A few years later, she was promoted to lieutenant and bestowed the Croix de Guerre. Later on, she will say, "I was fighting for the resistance. That's all. If I had to start over, I would, because I have no regrets. The Germans were our enemies, we were French." Sound check. Can you hear me? Perfect. Today is a great day for women, because just behind me, Margaret Hamilton launched the rocket ship Apollo 18. She is now the first female to go to space. Congrats, everybody!
Apollo 18?
She went to space!
Wait, why? No,
She's an astronaut!
No, she didn't go to space. Born in August 1936 in the US, Margaret grew up in Michigan. She studied at the university where she earned a Bachelor of Arts in Mathematics in 1958. But why science? Because she was inspired to follow the path of another woman, Florence Long.
Florence Long, who was professor of math at Earlham College. She was the head of the math department, but in some classes I was the only woman in class, but there was a woman teaching us. Everybody looked up to her. I mean, she was just a very warm and brilliant human being. It wasn't what she said, it's just who she was. When she'd get up and lecture, I thought, oh my God, I want to do what she's doing. It really did have an influence.
In the summer of 1959, Hamilton began working in the meteorology department at the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She developed software for predicting weather. In 1963, she joined the Charles Stark Draper Laboratory, which worked on the Apollo space mission. Initially hired as a programmer, she turned to system design. She became in charge of all the command module software, which allowed navigation and lunar landing guidance. She worked to gain hands-on experience during a time when computer science courses were uncommon and software engineering courses did not exist. Therefore, Margaret Hamilton's work can be described as a technical masterpiece. She's the co-pioneer of software engineering. Hamilton details how she came to make up the term software engineering.
When I first came up with the term, no one had heard of it before, at least in our world. It was an ongoing joke for a long time. They liked to kid me about my radical ideas. It was a memorable day when one of the most respected hardware gurus explained to everyone in a meeting that he agreed with me that the process of building software should also be considered an engineering discipline, just like with hardware.
The software programs she designed saved the landing of Apollo 11, which almost crashed before reaching the moon on July 21st, 1969. Over time, the term software engineering gained the same respect as any other technical discipline. Hamilton's innovation also helped include more and more women in this sphere. In 2019, to celebrate the 50 years of the Apollo landing, Google decided to pay tribute to Margaret Hamilton. The mirrors at the Ivan Papp plant were configured to create a picture of her in Apollo 11 by moonlight.
The other day, sitting on the bus, I thought about Claudette Colvin, this brave young black woman who had the courage to refuse to give her seat to a young white woman in 1955. Does this story ring a bell? You may have heard about the famous Rosa Parks, who did the same thing, but did you know that Claudette Colvin was the first to take action 9 months before Rosa Parks? Claudette Colvin was born in September 1939 in Montgomery, Alabama. She grew up under Jim Crow laws and segregation. These laws first required the separation of black and white people in places such as public transportations and schools, and later on they were extended to a majority of public spaces. Segregation affected black Americans' everyday life. In the 1950s, schools started to teach students about segregations during a particular month called the Black History Month. On the 2nd of March 1955, in Montgomery, Alabama, Claudette Colvin, a 15-year-old black girl, is asked to give her bus seat to a young white woman, claiming that it was her constitutional right. Later on, she explains that she felt empowered by other women.
That day, when the bus driver asked me to get up, I had this feeling come over me. It felt like Harriet Tubman was holding me down, hands were holding me down on one shoulder, and Sojourner Truth hands were holding me down on another shoulder. And I was glued to the seat.
In response to her action of resistance, police officers uncuffed and arrested her. She was placed alone in a little cell of the Montgomery Adult Detention Center. There, she felt vulnerable and started to pray for the police to release her. But why all this silence surrounding her action? Why did Rosa Parks tend to stay in history? Because the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, an association of anti-racist militants aiming to put an end to discrimination, thought that Claudette was too young and too dark to be the face of their campaign. Rosa Parks was considered to be a better face for their campaign because she was whiter, older, and more relatable as a victim. In 2018, at 82 years old, Claudette Colvin, pushed by supporters, decided to file a request to erase her arrest record. She decided to do so to show the generation growing up now that progress is possible and things do get better. Now, March the 2nd has become Claudette Colvin's Day in Montgomery, Alabama, as a way to thank her for her action. Today, she has become an inspiration for young people to take a stand for their rights and beliefs. Today, more than ever, it is important for people to fight for their rights and their personal convictions. Marsha P. Johnson is a good example of this fight. Born on the 24th of August 1945 in New Jersey, Marsha is a trans woman who grew up in a strict Christian house. At the age of 5, she started dressing as a girl. Her femininity wasn't accepted by her parents. At 17, she fled her home, moved to New York, but became homeless and had to turn to prostitution to survive. During this hard time in New York, she found a group of people who shared her values and state of mind in Christopher Street. Having a hard time being herself under her birth name, decided to switch it to Marsha P. Johnson.
But why the P?
It stands for Pay It No Mind, a message to her haters.
And why Johnson?
Johnson is for the restaurant she liked to go to, Howard Johnson's. The 60s and previous decades were not a good period of time for trans or gay people who faced a lot of discrimination. It was against the law to dress in drag or to have same-sex relations. Even bars were prohibited from serving alcohol to gay people. In June 1969, she became the face of the queer revolution. In the summer of the same year, in the Stonewall Inn, an uprising burst, later known as the Stonewall Riot. In Greenwich Village, the Stonewall Inn welcomed homeless runaways, providing them with a place to stay, surrounded with their peers. This inn quickly became the target of the New York Police Department. During the night between the 27th and the 28th of June 1969, the NYPD dragged every trans person out of the Stonewall Inn and decided to burn it in flames. Marsha and her friends saw this intervention as an opportunity to let go of all of the anger they had in them and decided to fight back for all the years of suffering and bad treatment from the police. A year later, gay activists in New York City organized a march to commemorate the event. This march will be the first gay pride. Social pressure and police pressure led to Marsha's mental illness. She had several episodes of breakdowns and had to be interned in psychiatry. 1990. Marsha contracted HIV and became an AIDS activist. In June 6, 1994, at 46 years old, she was found drowned in the Hudson River. Police declared it was a suicide, not wanting to pursue any further investigation. It remained a cold case for over 20 years. LGBTQ+ members, fans, and people who knew her never believed the suicide theory. They gather leads, reach out for witnesses. Some of them dedicate a huge part of their life to try and solve her case. The New York Anti-Violence Project has been investigating her death ever since. The documentary The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson exposes the fact that activists are faced with retention of information. People refuse to talk and share what they know about Marsha's death, because they fear reprisal. Today, the work is not finished. This fight for the truth regarding Marsha's death is very important for the members of the LGBTQ+ community, because it gives hope for the thousands of other trans whose deaths are not investigated.
These personalities allowed in their own way to shake the codes, the expectation, and the use of their time. Each has stood out, defended, and opened doors for the next generation of women. Through their journey and their life story, they have, without necessarily knowing it, instilled a wind of hope for women in a society that often clips their wings.
Today, being a woman involves a lot of things. Women have always fought for their rights and tried to make society understand that a woman should not bend to the rules of conformism. We are expected to act and adopt a behavior that society dictates as the normality, leading to the emergence of labels and stereotypes. Times have changed. Mentalities are no longer the same, but still, clichés persist. For me, a woman's life must not revolve around her body. Being a woman is being free, free to have ambitions, free to defend our own values, free to do what we want, and to be considered equal to men.